All right, October 12th, 2023, third field season of Finding Medina. We came up over to a property that's like 2 miles northeast of our first site. Just in the interest of being thorough and following also the road that we think is Old Leal Road that ran from our first site up over to El Carmen Church, and also following some of the battlefield theories of Joe Alvarez. And we're up on this little charco just up on the northeast corner of the property. Again, kind of not really where we'd expect to find anything. 2 days ago, we found 2 musket balls within the first 2 hours of being here. Yesterday, they found 6 more plus a piece of buckshot, all in that same smaller caliber range, 30 caliber to 50 caliber, but consistent with our first site and consistent with this other rumored site that's out there. I'm pulling up to this site right now, trying to see what in the world we're onto here or what we're finding. It's really complicating. So a quick recap of where we are at this point. Through 3 field seasons, we've searched 8 different sites, each site being about 10 to 20 acres each, which is maybe 100 acres out of an overall search area of something like 20,000 acres. Still, it's important to start by saying that we haven't just found munitions everywhere we've searched. Most of those sites have come up dry, indeed including 2 of the previously claimed battle sites which we searched and where we found nothing. Of the 8 different sites, really only 3 or 4 have produced anything interesting. The first one was back in February 2022, when we stumbled across some grape shot and several large diameter lead munitions on a site which is now recorded as the Avar site on the edge of Bruce Moses' area of interest. In October of 2022, we returned to that site and were able to expand it substantially to a pair of neighboring properties. In total now on those properties, we'd collected 24 colonial munitions, 2 pieces of cannon shot, and several dozen assorted buttons, buckles, forged iron goods, and other items, many of which we haven't been able to identify yet. Half of those munitions, too, recall, we had matched through XRF analysis to the famed blue wing ball, a 1.18-inch ball of lead found in the neck of a body long associated with the Battle of Medina. That first Avar site fits pretty nicely with some of the more credible accounts of the Battle of Medina, namely the accounts of the 2 Tejanos and lifetime residents of the area, Jose Antonio Navarro and Jose Antonio Menchaca. But it also fits pretty well the description of James Gaines, who was present at the internment of the bones of the battlefield dead 9 years after the battle, and also fits pretty nicely with an 1899 Southwestern Historical Quarterly article about an entirely different subject that casually and seemingly non-controversially refers to, quote, Toledo's defeat by Arredondo on the Gallinas Creek, end quote. But then, as you just heard in the audio that opened this episode, in October of 2023, on a totally separate site 3.5 miles away, which Joe Alvarez had put us on, and in the last 24 hours have pulled out 8 musket balls and a piece of buckshot. No?
Even more.
Yeah.
We're at 13.
13.
Right?
13 definites. 13 definites and 4 possibles.
5.
5 possibles.
13 definites and 5 possibles. And as of February 2024, and as presented at the Texas State Historical Association Annual Symposium by our colleague, Todd Allman, we've confirmed that the majority of these 18 munitions also match metallurgically with the blue wing ball, and that the rest actually all cluster with each other. So what is this site? What the hell is this site?
Well, so a couple of really cool things about this site. For one thing, like, I got to give credit to Kinsey, because what Kinsey did was actually read the landscape and say, water sources. So the charco there was really the indicator for you got to go in this spot. In addition to the road, of course, which the charco is right next to. But what we have here is a really interesting parallel to the other site we have. It's not just that we have musket balls, it's that those musket balls are the exact same calibers that we found before in the same ratios. So you got a lot of 30 calibers, which is maybe a pistol shot, a couple of 40s. Right now we've got 150 cal. From the other site we had 250 cals, a couple of 40s, mostly 30s, and some buckshot. You've got the same ratios coming up, but the other thing is, and I know this won't record, but if you look at the map of how these are coming up, we've got a really interesting line coming off that charco, kind of going to the northwest. And we think we might have another concentration about 30 meters away down here where these guys are working. So we might have two concentrations that are separated by about 30 meters, which would be really nice battle lines, or skirmish lines in this particular case. Oh,
and that's what we're trying to figure out. Are we on skirmish lines? Are we on like retreating armies, like Last Stand kind of things? Like, it's very confusing, but super exciting.
Let me go grab my map really quick.
Yeah.
This second site is intriguing for multiple reasons. It sits right at the headwaters of a small, now dry stream of water about 4 miles southwest of that Medina River crossing, but it also sits halfway between Avar's first site and El Carmen Church, where the Royalist dead from the battle are allegedly buried. And in fact, it's 3.5 miles in a straight line along the old Leal Road, which some have proposed as the shortcut, or Camino que Cortaba, between the Laredo Road and this alternate Medina crossing. If you're like me, your mind immediately jumps to a pretty exciting idea. Is this second site the initial Republican ambush line? But then this happened. My friend, Martin Gonzalez, Atascosa County Historical Commission chairman, the same Atascosa County Historical Commission that has done more than anyone to keep the memory of this battle alive, well, Martin called me on January 15th of this year with some exciting news. In the past, he'd alluded in broad strokes to some work that he and his commission had been doing down in Atascosa County, right on the Galvan Creek, the same creek proposed by Robert Tonoff many years before, though further east in their case. And they had found 21 or so lead munitions that Todd Allman had also just matched to the Blue Wing ball through XRF analysis. But here's the confusing part. Their site is almost 8 miles south of the Avar site. And here's the second confusing factor. Another group has found a fourth site, 6 miles from the original Avar site, the other direction, 14 miles from the Atascosa site. The finds from that fourth site haven't been released yet for XRF, but visually, I'm told, they look a lot like the other 70 or so total munitions that have now been analyzed. What in the world is going on? 5 years ago, when we started this project, there were something like 9 proposed battle sites and exactly 0 artifacts that had ever been pulled from the ground from a proposed site. Now, in the course of 18 months, we have 4 conflict sites that are all arguably consistent with some archival descriptions of the Battle of Medina. 4 sites across a 14-mile area, which in a sense puts us right back to where we started 5 years ago. I'm at a bit of a loss. Obviously, we need to go back and really analyze our XRF work linking all these munitions together and to the Blue Wing ball, because we're hanging a lot on that link, and we probably need to validate those with a second XRF or do some mass spectrometry or something else. Your ideas are welcome. But also, maybe, it's time to really rethink what the battlefield of Medina looked like. It's very cinematic to think of it in terms of lines of men firing at each other in sharp Napoleonic formations. But the truth is, all the accounts of the Battle of Medina mostly emphasize that it was a highly mobile battle, with maybe half the men mounted. And though the accounts agree that the riflemen and artillery slugged it out with each other at close range for several hours somewhere, as the veterans on our Avar crew have pointed out to me, there's nothing in the accounts that says these guys didn't move around when they were doing that. Men, especially untrained men, like most of the participants in the battle were, don't tend to just stand still and get shot at, I've been told. I'll admit, there's something kind of unsatisfyingly postmodern about the idea that perhaps everyone's theory about the battlefield of Medina's location is partially correct, or that the battlefield may, in fact, belong to the entire area that has for so long kept its memory alive. I'm not quite ready to settle for that, but it's all definitely caused me to reevaluate how I think about the written sources.
Archaeologists talk a lot about bias. So it's not so much the account is either intentionally or unintentionally incorrect, it's that this individual's perspective on the battle who's writing it is probably really limited. Is this individual actually going around and interviewing all of his subordinate officers and whatnot, or even line infantrymen or whatnot, on where they were and what they were doing and exactly what happened? This is very much a couple of individuals' perspective on what happened. And as we're looking at this terrain, visibility is going to be really low. I think the idea is just that, yeah, we have a textual account. Yeah, that textual account is really helpful, but it's really just a couple of individuals' very limited view on how this engagement actually happened. It's a simplified account of the battle. It probably doesn't take into account the full scope of what happened on that day in terms of all the operations that were taking place.
That was Stephen Humphreys describing the challenges with even well-intentioned written accounts. And yet we interpreters of the evolving evidence of the battlefield of Medina face a very similar challenge. For a long time, most of us students of the battle have just assumed that some of the contradictory accounts would turn out to be wrong and others would turn out to be right. But it may not be that simple. How would a participant in a battle covering an entire day and many miles describe that battle? How might he describe it differently if he'd been mounted? Or if he'd never seen that terrain before? Or if he only spoke one of the many languages spoken on the battlefield that day? It's really hard when you work on a project like this to keep your focus from narrowing, to keep from fixating on one theory, even in the face of hard to reconcile new data, especially when you've been neck deep in the subject matter now for years. But I'm inspired and reminded here of the example left by the now deceased Judge Robert Tonoff, a man who listed himself as only the editor of a book that he effectively co-authored with his then deceased friend Ted Schwartz, and a man still willing to consider new evidence for the battle even when it contradicted his own published theories. I have a new respect for the intellectual honesty and humility that requires. But Judge Tonoff had something on his side that we don't, and he even said as much to me. I'm talking about time. Every day, more and more of these properties in the area of the battle are under threat from subdivision, development, and utility lines. We've made incredible progress these last 5 years uncovering hard evidence of the battle. The window to discover more is closing. I think it gives increased urgency to identifying some of the other non-munition artifacts that we've been finding. Ernesto Rodriguez with the Alamo has already been helpful identifying a few of the miscellaneous items that we've pulled out of the ground, like powder horns and rifle banding and ramrod mounts. But I'm hopeful that others of you listening might be able to identify even more and more definitively some of the other items. The reason this matters is that positively identifying some of these items helps us figure out how to prioritize our limited resources in future field seasons, of which we may not have that many more. It'll help us decide which battle sites to go back to and which ones to try to expand. So if you have the time, go to my website, brandonseal.com, and in the podcast archive, go to the Battle of Medina artifacts page and have a look at the pictures of some of the objects that I'm going to post there. Please let me know if you have ideas for what they might be. And of course, you can go to the Whitty Museum and see some of them for yourself. I hear rumors that they're going to be expanding the exhibit with some of the new artifacts soon. Crowdsourcing has brought this project this far. I'm hopeful it can continue to carry us forward. Still something there.
Away with you. All right. Yeah, it's just...